The moment Everett Calloway heard those words, something inside him went completely quiet. Not the kind of quiet that comes before tears, the kind that comes before decision. Everett had been standing in the hallway of the home he had purchased, in the neighborhood he had chosen, in the city he had relocated to because Sloan Harrington Calloway had asked him to. Everett had not meant to overhear anything. Everett had simply come home early from a client dinner that ended before dessert. The front door had been unlocked. The lights in the living room were low, and Sloan's voice, clear and casual and entirely unguarded, drifted from the kitchen where Sloan was on the phone with someone Everett would later identify as Sloan's closest friend, Demi Whitfield. "He's a good man, sure," Sloan said. "But to me, honestly, he's just a wallet." There was laughter on the other end. Sloan laughed too. It was a comfortable laugh. The kind of laugh you only produce when you are completely certain no one who matters is listening. Everett did not move. Everett did not speak. Everett stood in the hallway of the home he had paid $1.4 million for in Greenwich, Connecticut, and felt the entire architecture of the last 6 years of marriage reassemble itself into something unrecognizable. Everett Calloway was 41 years old. Everett had built a mid-sized financial consulting firm from nothing, starting in a one-bedroom apartment in Stamford with a used laptop and a client list of exactly 3 people. By the time Everett met Sloan at a rooftop event in Manhattan, the firm employed 22 people, held accounts with several institutional clients, and generated enough annual revenue to place Everett in a tax bracket that required its own accountant. Sloan Harrington had been everything Everett was not, outwardly. Sloan was effortless in rooms that made Everett feel calculated. Sloan understood social architecture the way Everett understood balance sheets. Sloan could read a room, work a table, and make everyone present feel simultaneously seen and slightly envious. And Everett, who had spent most of adulthood being the most competent person in professional settings and the most awkward person in personal ones, had found Sloan's ease intoxicating. They dated for 2 years. Everett proposed at a rented cottage on the Connecticut shoreline. Sloan said yes while the sun was going down and the water looked like hammered copper. Everett had never felt more certain of anything. The early years of the marriage had been genuinely good. Everett believed that then, and Everett still believed it standing in the hallway. The problem with love is that it is not a constant. It has seasons, and some seasons are convincing enough to make you forget there will be others. Sloan had moved into the Greenwich house with warmth and intention. Sloan had made the house into a home in the ways Everett never would have known to. The way light fell through the kitchen in the morning was Sloan's doing. The dinners with other couples, the memberships at the right clubs, the relationships with the right neighbors, all of that had been Sloan's architecture, and Everett had been grateful for every brick of it. But somewhere in the 3rd year, a shift began. It was not loud. It was a drift. The kind that happens in calm water when you stop paying attention to where the current is taking you. Sloan stopped asking about Everett's work, not in a charged or resentful way, just in the way that a person stops asking about something that no longer interests them. The conversations at dinner became Sloan's days, Sloan's plans, Sloan's frustrations with the renovation contractor, Sloan's thoughts on the upcoming trip to Palm Beach that Sloan had already decided they were taking. Everett had not raised it. Everett had told himself that this was simply what long marriages became. You found your lanes. You stopped narrating every interior thought. You coexisted with warmth and occasional electricity, and that was enough. Everett had told himself that story so many times it had become background noise. But now, in the hallway, the background noise was gone, and what was left was a sentence Everett could not unhear. To me, honestly, he's just a wallet. Everett walked quietly back to the front door. Everett opened it slowly, stepped outside onto the front step, and closed it behind himself without a sound. Everett sat on the stone step in the dark for 11 minutes. Everett counted them. Everett then stood, opened the door again, and walked inside as though arriving for the first time. "Hey," Everett called from the entryway, voice entirely level. "Hey." Sloan's voice came back bright and immediate from the kitchen. By the time Everett entered, Sloan was off the phone and was pouring 2 glasses of wine, smiling the smile that had made Everett rearrange the entire geography of a life. "You're home early," Sloane said. "Dinner ended early," Everett said. Everett accepted the glass of wine. Everett sat at the kitchen island. Everett asked about Sloane's day, and Sloane talked, and Everett listened, and not a single thing in the room looked different. That was the night Everett Calloway decided not to react. Not yet. In the weeks that followed, Everett did something he had only ever done in professional contexts. Everett paid attention, not the passive attention of a spouse going through the motions. Deliberate, clinical, forensic attention. Everett began to observe the financial anatomy of the marriage the way Everett would observe the books of a company under due diligence. What Everett found was not fraudulent. It was not illegal. It was simply illuminating. Sloane spent, on average, between $14,000 and $18,000 a month across 4 credit cards, all of which were connected to accounts Everett maintained. The spending was not reckless by Greenwich standards, but the categories were instructive. There was almost no spending on the household in any practical sense. The housekeeper, the gardener, the utilities, the groceries, those had always been routed through a separate household account Everett managed directly. Sloane's cards were for Sloane. Boutiques in the village. A standing weekly appointment at a spa in Westport. Lunches that cost more than most people's car payments. Weekend trips to see Demi Whitfield, which Sloane described as catching up, and which Everett now understood included conversations about Sloane's husband being a wallet. There was also, Everett noticed, a pattern of cash withdrawals. Consistent. $500 twice a month. Not large enough to trigger a conversation. Not small enough to be incidental. Everett did not investigate further. Everett filed it. On a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after the hallway moment, Everett sat across from Sloane at dinner and studied the way Sloane moved through a meal. Sloane was comfortable. Not just comfortable. Sloane was settled. The kind of settled that only exists when a person feels no risk. And Everett thought about that word. Risk. Everett had built a career on understanding what people did when risk entered the room. Most people performed badly under risk. They overreacted. They underprepared. They confused urgency with strategy. Everett had never done that in business. And Everett was not going to do it now. Before we go further, I want to ask you something honestly. If you had been standing in that hallway and heard those words, would you have walked back in and acted like nothing happened? Or would you have said something right then and there? Drop it in the comments, because people are genuinely split on this, and the reason why says a lot about how each of us processes betrayal. Everett called a private attorney named Garrison Wolfe on a Monday morning from the parking garage of the firm. Garrison Wolfe did not practice matrimonial law exclusively, but Garrison Wolfe was known in certain circles for the kind of quiet, comprehensive counsel that people with assets and intelligence required before they made large, irreversible moves. Everett laid the situation out with the precision of a client presenting a case. Everett did not use emotional language. Everett described what had been heard. Everett described what had been observed. Everett described the financial structure of the marriage. Garrison Wolfe listened without interrupting. When Everett finished, Garrison Wolfe said, "The first question I always ask a client in this position is, what do you actually want?" Everett thought about that for a long time before answering. "I want her to understand what she has," Everett finally said. "And if she can't, I want to understand that too." Garrison Wolfe nodded. "Then we move carefully," Garrison Wolfe said. "And we move in the right order." The right order, as Garrison Wolfe explained it, began with documentation. Everett spent 2 weeks quietly organizing 6 years of financial records. Not to be weaponized, but to be understood. Everett needed to know, with precision, the full financial shape of the marriage. What had been contributed, what had been consumed, what existed jointly, and what existed individually. Garrison Wolfe had a forensic accountant named Petra Aldridge review everything. Petra Aldridge was thorough and efficient and communicated exclusively in facts. What Petra Aldridge produced was a picture of a marriage that was financially almost entirely unilateral. Everett had funded the house. Everett had funded the lifestyle. Everett had funded the club memberships, the trips, the wardrobe, the car Sloan drove, and the renovation of the kitchen Sloan had insisted on 2 years prior. Sloan had, in 6 years of marriage, contributed financially to the household in amounts that totaled less than what Everett spent in 2 months. This was not, Petra Aldridge noted, legally problematic. In a marriage, it is legal and common for one spouse to carry the financial weight. But it was, as Everett already knew, personally clarifying. On a Wednesday afternoon in early October, Everett made 3 phone calls. The first was to the bank that issued 2 of Sloan's personal cards. Everett, as the primary account holder, requested both cards be deactivated with immediate effect. The second call was to the issuing institution of the third card. Same request, same outcome. The third call was to the account through which Sloan's weekly spa appointments and boutique charges were processed. Everett reduced the available balance to 0 and suspended the account pending a review that Everett had no intention of completing quickly. The entire process took 40 minutes. Everett returned to the afternoon's client meetings. Everett did not mention it to Sloan that evening. Everett made dinner, a simple pasta with a salad, and asked Sloan about the renovation on the Whitfield guest house that Demi Whitfield had been having done. Sloan talked about Demi Whitfield's renovation for 20 minutes. Everett listened and nodded. The first day passed without event. Sloan did not attempt to use any of the cards that day, as far as Everett could determine. The second day, Everett received a text message from Sloan that read, "Card declined at Saks. Think there's an issue with the account." Everett typed back, "I'll look into it tonight." Everett did not look into it. The third day began with Sloan attempting to pay for a lunch reservation at a restaurant in Westport. The card declined. A second card declined. A third card declined. Everett would later learn that Sloan had borrowed cash from Demi Whitfield to cover the bill, and that the conversation during that lunch had shifted from its usual social register to something considerably more pointed. The call came at 4:17 in the afternoon. Everett was in a meeting. Everett saw Sloan's name on the screen and excused himself calmly. Everett stepped into the hallway outside the conference room. A different hallway than the one where the story began, but a hallway that felt, in its way, symmetrical. Everett answered. "Every single card is blocked," Sloan said. The voice was not calm. The voice had a quality Everett had not heard often from Sloan. Something tightly wound, something that had been compressed into a register that was not quite yelling, but was constructed to have the impact of yelling without the deniability problem. "I know," Everett said. Silence. "What do you mean you know?" "I mean, I deactivated them," Everett said. "When?" "Wednesday," Everett said. Another silence. This silence had a different texture than the first. "Why?" Sloan said, and it was not a question. It was a word said the way someone says a word when they already know the answer they are dreading. "I think," Everett said, "that we need to have a conversation." "Everett, what is going on?" "Come home," Everett said. "I'm not going to have this conversation on the phone." "Everett, come home, Sloan." Everett hung up. Sloan was home within the hour. Everett was sitting at the kitchen island, the same island where Everett had sat 3 weeks prior, accepting a glass of wine and asking about Sloan's day with the calm of a person who had just been told what this marriage actually was. Sloan walked in with the energy of someone who had prepared an argument during the commute. "You cannot just turn off every card without telling me," Sloan said immediately. "I can," Everett said. "They're all primary accounts in my name." "That is not the point." "Then what is the point, Sloan?" Sloan stopped moving. Something in Everett's tone had registered. Not anger, not hurt, something quieter and more durable than either. "About 3 weeks ago," Everett said, "I came home early from a dinner. The front door was unlocked. You were in the kitchen on the phone with Demi Whitfield." Sloan's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "You said, he's a good man, sure. But to me, honestly, he's just a wallet." The room was completely silent. Sloan did not deny it. That landed differently than anything else could have. "I didn't mean it like that," Sloan said finally. "How did you mean it?" Everett asked. It was a throwaway comment." "To whom?" "To Demi. About your husband." "Everett, people say things to their friends that they believe," Everett said, "or that they don't believe. Which is it?" Sloan looked at the countertop. "I don't know," Sloan said. And that honesty, unintended, unguarded, arriving through the same crack that the original sentence had arrived through, was somehow more revealing than the sentence that had started all of this. What followed was not a screaming match. It was not a dramatic confrontation. It was two people sitting across from each other for the first time in years without any of the scaffolding that had made their marriage feel functional. No social calendar to discuss. No renovation update. No dinner to prepare. Just the two of them and the question that the kitchen island had been waiting 3 weeks to host. Everett did not yell. Everett asked questions. Measured, direct, non-rhetorical questions. Do you feel anything for me that is not connected to what I provide financially? Sloan struggled with that. Do you think about what I actually feel inside this marriage, or only what I make possible? Sloan looked genuinely shaken. When is the last time you asked me something about my life that had nothing to do with money? Sloan could not answer. Not because Sloan was being evasive, but because Sloan was, for perhaps the first time, actually listening to the questions instead of formulating the response. Here is the question I want to ask you, the one that I think this whole story hinges on. At this point, knowing what Sloan said, seeing what Sloan contributed, watching Sloan struggle to answer these questions, do you think this marriage was salvageable? Or do you think Everett already knew the answer before sitting down at that island? Think about it carefully and drop your answer in the comments, because the psychology of that moment is more complicated than it looks. Sloan asked for time. Everett gave it, not because Everett was uncertain, but because Everett believed that anything worth knowing deserved the space to become clear on its own terms. For 2 weeks, Everett and Sloan lived in a house with a different quality of air between them. Sloan was quieter. Sloan cooked dinner 3 times, badly, but with visible effort. Sloan asked Everett once about a client situation Everett had mentioned 6 months earlier and whether it had resolved. Everett answered, and Everett noticed the question. Everett noticed it the way a person notices the first warm day after a long winter, aware that it may not last, but present to it regardless. At the end of the 2 weeks, Sloan asked to talk. They sat again at the kitchen island. Sloan spoke for a long time. Sloan talked about growing up in a household where love and financial provision had been so intertwined that Sloan had never learned to separate them. Sloan talked about a father who expressed every form of affection through spending and whose emotional unavailability had been compensated by the freedom of an unlimited credit line. Sloan talked about the fear, which Sloan was only now naming as fear, of being in a marriage where the emotional channel was narrow and the financial one was wide, and how Sloan had unconsciously replicated the template of the household Sloan had grown up in. Sloan did not say this as an excuse. Sloan said it as a reckoning. I didn't marry you for your money, Sloan said, but somewhere I let you become what my father was. And I think I've been too comfortable in that for too long. And I think I became someone I don't want to be. Everett listened to all of it. When Sloan finished, Everett was quiet for a long time. I believe you, Everett said finally. That doesn't mean I'm not still hurt. I know, Sloan said. But do you want to try? Sloan asked. Everett looked at the kitchen Sloan had designed, at the light falling through the window that Sloan had chosen, at the person across the island who had just, for the first time, sat inside something true rather than skimming the surface of something comfortable. Yes, Everett said, but everything is different now. The way we talk about money, the way we talk about what we need from each other. All of it changes. Not because I'm punishing you, because I'm not going to build a life on a version of this marriage that was a lie. Sloan nodded. I know, Sloan said. I think I've been waiting for someone to say that to me for a long time. In the months that followed, Everett and Sloan began couples counseling with a therapist in Westport named Dr. Renata Forsyth. Dr. Renata Forsyth was direct and structured in a way that suited both of them. The sessions were not comfortable. Comfort, Dr. Renata Forsyth noted early, was often the enemy of honesty in long marriages. Sloan began seeing Dr. Renata Forsyth individually as well. Sloan also, quietly, looked into part-time consulting work, not because Everett had asked, but because Sloan had decided that financial dependence, when it was total, had a cost that went beyond money. The cards were reinstated, not all of them, and not with the same limits. Not as punishment, as a reset, a structure that reflected a marriage that was now being constructed consciously rather than by default. Everett never told anyone in their social circle what had happened. Not Garrison Wolf's name. Not Petra Aldridge's findings. Not the hallway. Not the phone call on the third day. What the Greenwich neighbors saw was a couple who seemed, if anything, slightly more present with each other than before. Which was true, and also caused something that would take years to fully account for. Everett still thought about the hallway sometimes. Not with anger. The anger had metabolized into something quieter and more useful, with a kind of clarity that Everett had not had access to before that night. The clarity that comes from knowing exactly what you were worth to someone at their most unguarded, and from choosing, with full information, what to do with that knowledge. Some people would have left. Some people would have exploded. Everett had gone inside, accepted a glass of wine, and asked about the day. And then, in the weeks and months that followed, had done something that required more discipline than either of those options. Everett had paid attention.